Welcome traveler, I'm free-to-play and I'm your guide for successful free-to-play adventure on Terra. Today I'll give you an idea of which unit is worth pulling for as a new player based on my own playing experience. I will list them chronologically with their release date in the global server. Since the last tier list video I got 5 new 5-star travelers and some of them changed my perspective on units in general, but let me explain to you in detail in a few minutes. So if you miss out on specific units, they sure have been covered in the last part of that video. If you're looking for a unit specifically, you can scroll through the video looking for the right timestamp or click it in the video description. I've changed never used to niche, as you always have units which fit in a specific situation the best, even if I didn't see any use for that unit for general purpose. Let's start. So before Olberic and Ophelia had their release, Kersjes joined the Hunters, and he also joined my Hunter squad too lately. He's the only hunter who can do only single target attacks. Those are very powerful, but he's missing shield shaving capabilities. Still, he can decrease the bow resistance down active and almost caps them all by himself. So if you pull him early, he can so assist you, dealing way more damage to enemies weak to bow. And he's even better with Chloe, I will cover later on. What he lacks in AoE and multiple attacks for bow, he has very solid ice attacks, which can be helpful for the Hunter training tower. He has his usage, but as long as there are no enemies with only bow weakness showing up in the next updates, he won't be used so much as I wanted it to. Dorothea. She's the second Sacred Blaze character. She got buffed so good with the global update that her passive is active almost always, because that is a very strong self regen. And even if both of her strongest attacks have recoil damage, that was also reduced, and together with that stronger regen, the passive is always on. But what does her passive do? It gives 15% spare damage up on full HP. And most of the merchants coming do have at least 15% damage up on themselves, so that passive is very good to cap those. But when Richard arrives, you want him in your party instead, which makes her absolutely obsolete sadly. She's a very strong character anyway, and still very good for Merchant Tower. So I wanted to put her into solid, but she gets into niche when Richard arrives. Yunnie is our 6th arena champion and can hit a lot of weaknesses on the enemy. A lot of people use her to unveil those weaknesses at the start of the battle, so they speed up things. But apart from that, she does not have any really hard-hitting nukes and can hit all enemies 2 times with bow at maximum, plus once with fire. But that is especially good for the Hunter training tower because of both of those advantages. So sorry Yunnie, there are better hunters. And Jilmeila is one of those I use the most, but not because of her being an extremely hard-hitting hunter when bleeding is on the enemy, which can also be inflicted by herself with a high percentage thanks to the EN buffs, but she can also use dark attacks, which can hit really hard when used with a fortune weapon boosting her elemental attack. With the EN buffs, she can now buff her own elemental attack, which makes so much sense now with her being a very powerful dark attacker. Her best dark attack is a 4 times random target. That's more than Primrose is doing. So because of her only fitting in dark fights, I put her into solid anyway, just because she does a very great job doing that. And if you use her in hunter fights, she can also hit very hard. From dark to light. Soleil is an apothecary. You want to have an elemental attack boosting Fortune X because her light attacks can be great and her healing gets even stronger that way. She casts Regen, which is also giving dark resistance. She heals and also gives elemental attack on a single unit, and her ultimate is increasing your front row's light attack. There are certain fights in the game where light is very important, and she played one of my key roles in those battles, so having her makes your life a little easier with these battles. She is solid because of her capabilities, and she can be used in a lot of light exploiting battles, which are one of the hardest of the game at this point. His EN buff, what is his name? Which I wouldn't call a buff, but don't discuss it here. Lars can do wind, can decrease wind resistance while doing that, which is neat. But he can do sword way better. So good that I put him into the outstanding roster right now. I would even say he's the best general pool sword unit we have right now. Making him stronger and giving him more uses of his ultimate serves your battles very well. What makes him so good is that he gets priority when he's using max BP like Keetgar or Molu, and he also has an AoE attack which hits 3 times like she does, but he also has a skill which hits 5 times like Xanta and is also very powerful. His ultimate gets prior to and also reduced physical damage by 5 to 10% depending on U9 or U10. Having priority is a very good and is still at this point of the game. Sure, you can boost speed with accessories or with soul weapons too to be faster than the opponent for breaking, but that's reducing the maximum damage output as you could increase the power instead. So having him as your breaker makes this unit a guaranteed pickup when his banner arrives. From very good warriors to even more useful thieves, I picked up Falco a little later in the game and he works exactly like Dorothea does but for thieves. 15% more damage to thieves at full HP, and he also has a lot of damage with his moves too. What Dorothea is missing is an ultimate which is increasing merchants' damage even further. That is what Falco can do with his band of thieves. Richard is replacing Doro soon, but we don't have anyone replacing Falco right now. So if you love to use thieves, you will surely love Falco. The 7th arena champion and one of the hardest fights you will confront in the game, but this time you will be rewarded with a unit which is so worth your time bringing him to level 100. Yanlong is an extremely hard-hitting cleric who can reduce stuff resistance, reduce physical defense with his multi-attack, can hit up to 5 times with that move, can increase his attack with his ultimate and even grant him dead aim where he always crits. He is so powerful, and for fights you need stuff which just have been released at this point of the game in the end. I am very glad I have leveled him up, as he is a very good addition to all the other team members even if he's using a totally different weapon. That is mainly because of his A4 accessory, which you will get over time. By breaking the opponent, you decrease the physical defense by 10%, which is great by itself, but also 10% stuff and ice resistance down too. So when breaking the opponent with another unit, every physical attacker is getting the advantage, and he does 2 times. Every time you can take him into the battle, he does not disappoint. Vludai. She got released as Yanlong entered the arena. She has an ability which makes you profit from his mechanics, where he is shifting to spare weakness at the end of the turn he had sword weakness. So after she used that skill, the turn afterwards, the enemy will be struck by spare attack. So even if you only use sword units and have Vludai, you can still break Yanlong in this turn and attack him with your sword units in the turn he is not weak to sword. Apart from that, this move is doing good additional damage every turn and gives Vludai a very good skill in addition to all the other skills, for example of course the healing thrust, 4 times single target spare, or 5 to 8 times ultimate spare random, which is just nuts. For merchant teams she is a must have, but I must admit that there are a few merchants coming which kind of push her downwards a stair, so I have to put her into the solid roster nowadays. There is another merchant now which I didn't put much interest into in the beginning as the other 2 units which were way more promising, but 9S from the Nier Automata collab can also hit 4 times spare, increase physical defense of your group, heal your group, can break one of the enemy shields while decreasing physical attack and defense, and does that on an ultimate level too, which can come in handy very much when looking at later fights where you need to stock those ultimate level defense downs. He is a free unit, so you can get him as soon as the collab starts. His passives are not that great though, but don't underestimate him like I did and level him up. It will be worth it. 2B can hit sword axe and dog weakness, and the latter while reducing physical defense. Her passive lets her evade attacks by chance and increase her BP while doing that. She can evade with one of her skills too, as she has two moves which, when used on full BP, are guaranteed to crit, which get 30% physical attack up with her passive at that time. So that unit is guaranteed to hit the damage cap too. She is just neat. I used her and the upcoming unit for beating Yanlong the first time, so she has a very special place in my heart, but I must admit I don't use her that frequently. There are just too much sword users out there of which you can't use much in your team, and 2B can't compete here. For physical axe teams that's a totally different story, but there are not as much enemies weak to axe who don't have sword as a weakness too. She's still very solid and can be a great addition to your team if you don't have much sword units to begin with. She is the main reason people want the GLpYh so bad. But first things first, for battles which are not lasting forever, I understand. But right now, in the end, we have those long-lasting battles, and I took her out of my roster and replaced her with Yanlong for one particular fight, so I am starting to not use her from now on, way more often, I believe. But for that time I used her, she was so worth it, even with no awakenings. Like in the original game, she can go berserk and gets an additional 50% damage up and gets faster for 6 to 9 turns depending on the boost. She also gains double cast for every of her skills, and she can hit sword, axe and dagger 3 times, so 6 times, or nukes all of those once or twice when berserk. Her HP gets reduced after the regen has applied at the end of the turn by 40%, so she can be easily taken out, but at least she has hang tough, like Tressa and Alphen, so she can survive once with 1 HP, and berserk does never reduce her HP to 0. So she's like Cyrus but with physical attacks, but she can also double cast for a specific time. When used properly, her damage count gets way higher than anyone else in the game. I'd say she's still overpowered, but that is about to change right now. Let's see in the next part of this video series. So all new units are worth the pull and can support your game for a very long time. We have talked about axes a lot, but that one is taking the cake. Hayes is granting axe damage up to the front row and has one skill where he has priority and dealing axe damage 4 times random target. This can be very helpful for his passive called Pressure, which is reducing the physical defense of the enemy by 20% while also boosting his by 20% too. That alone is so powerful, but combine that with Yanlong's A4 to have 30% physical defense reduction at the first attack with your break. I didn't pull him as his banner was up, but lately I'm very grateful that I spooked him because of 2 more reasons now. His passive is also triggered when he uses his fire attack. Even if it has no prio, you can make haze fast enough to break the enemy anyway and make that enemy weak to fire also lose physical defense a lot. And with the newest addition of the 9th tourney champion lately, haze is also able to counter attacks now with tome attacks, so we can use his passive now on enemies weak to axe, fire and tome, which is very powerful and makes him such a great unit you should have at least once unawakened. But before we talk too much about a 9th tourney champion, we have to talk about the hardest fight of the tourneys. Beating Largo and knowing that Yanlong was great doesn't make Largo go as a unit stronger than he is, unfortunately. He is kind of useless for a long time, and as soon as I thought I will use him more frequently now because of his taunt, which is reducing AoE physical attack, another unit came out which does that with elemental attack too, and has way better skills than Largo does. So I don't know when he becomes more playable. Until then, he stays in the power crap zone. At the start I talked about Chloe, which is able to cap bow resistance down now with the help of Kersjes, but wait, there's more. She can taunt attacks onto a unit like her Nona can. Her bow attacks increase your front row's attack, and her bow nuke also heals the front row. So she's the first hunter being able to heal all units, which can be extremely good for Hunt Trading Tower. Her ultimate is also increasing the physical attack of your units and heals them. So that and all of her other skills, including her passive, which increases bow attack by the way, makes her very useful for bow fights. And I can't wait to use her for an upcoming one, which is the tragedy that bow weaknesses are not covered as often until now, so I also have to put her into solid, even if she proves to be more than that. One unit left before our first memory traveler. Nona was always a part of my farming team for souls in the Master Training Tower and in normal battles in Somewhere Dark. Entering the battle, she gains full ultimate gauge, thus can launch her ultimate on turn 1, which attacks all enemies and is filling the ultimate gauge of the front row by around 20%. That way she can spam a hard-hitting attack normal monsters can't survive, or you can make everyone's ultimate be used in turn 2 when they have used up all 3 BP from the start. That way you consume very little SP per battle and can farm a lot before running to an inn once in a while. She also has a one-hit prior attack and buffs crit of the group, but I would rather play blue die instead if I really want to have an advantage over a long battle. So for that niche of farming, she's the very best, and I'm so looking forward to use her still in the upcoming chapters. And now the king has arrived. Richard, the one I was talking about earlier, who replaces Dorothea. He also gives the same buffs to warriors, by the way. And while he's at it, he's also giving 15% a physical attack up. Because why not? And that just from standing there. But if the king stands up from his throne, he can reduce the sword resistance from random enemies, can buff your whole front row's physical attack up, sword damage up and spare damage up at the same time. And he's not even finished with that, because when he's using his ultimate, he also improves the sword and spare damage up again. So on 3 different categories, he's pushing both of those classes up to 50%. If you ever want to save rubies for a character, make sure you have plenty of those left for Richard. He's one of the most impressive units ever released. Summer has arrived. Sophia and Fiore put on their bath suits and they are now ready to burn the opponents. Well, it's translated to combust in English now, but that's fine. When Fiore EX combusts the enemy, it loses 1 shield at the end of the turn, but it can't break the enemy. That's a new status ailment, which will be important later on. But how is she causing that? She counters attacks. And not even that, she completely nullifies those. All of them. The whole turn, just by clicking one move. Physical attack incoming, physical block, nullify, combust. Elemental attack, elemental block, nullify, combust. It feels like cheating, really. But sometimes you don't know what attack is coming. So if an elemental one is coming and you click physical, then she will counter. But she'll probably die too. So scripted fights like arena battles are no problem, apart from Hammy. And of course those fights where the enemy is using AoEs. Maybe Fiore survives, but maybe the others don't. Then you should rely on another tank here. This is a really difficult choice where to put her, since I find other tanks way more suited for different battle situations, and you can still put someone slower behind your tank so that you can still do something else with that row, because a taunt takes a few turns before it's over. Fiore's block is only working once a turn. If you're able to use her, she's magnificent. She really is, and that's why I put her into outstanding now. And now Sophia EX. I recently used her against the 9th arena champion, which just came out, and I was so amazed how well she did. In the apothecary tower she just smashed everything. She has that passive where she gets stronger the more icons she has, like elemental attack up and stuff. That is also increasing the count of one of her attacks from 3 to 5 when at full power. That's very useful and can deal a lot of damage. She can also cast a regen and can heal the group while recovering SP and also grant ice and wind resistance. She has a lot of utilities and you can't miss out on her while making a wind team. At this point of the game, there are not much battles you really need strong wind units, but that may change and then you're prepared. I've missed one MT, but the next one was General Krauser. If you pull for him, you have the chance to get a Richard dupe in those banners, just for you to know. I pulled him very recently, and most of the time, if I pull a unit very late in the game, I don't happen to use them. That was a different story with Hayes and Falco, and it is even more with Krauser. He is by far the strongest merchant in the game. He has one big flaw though, but let me explain. He can use one attack which hits AoE 4 times, then you can't use it again. But therefore you get a buff which grants you 50% more attack on some attacks. Afterwards you use his 6 single target spare attack. He can't use that again, but you gain a double cast. You see where this is going. Then you use his nuke, which is enormously powerful in the first break turn at best, and is casted 2 times. In the second break turn it has 50% less power, but still is double casted. He then uses his ultimate recoup to gain back those 2 first attacks, then rinse and repeat. If he's at U10, it's the question if you have enough SP on him to launch that cycle more often, but the main problem is that you need to make sure that Krauser is coming through with his attacks, and that every one of your units is also ready to break and all adjustments are made, and that the opponent doesn't do something terrible, like blinds all of your units in the turn you want to break or something. But you can work around that. He is the most powerful unit right now, so if you need merchants, he's the best choice you have. Cecily is also a merchant, but she can also do 3 times axe and 3 times tome attacks, and also nukes them, so she's Cyrus but physical, but without double cast like A2. So more physical Cyrus then. EN got Cecily way later than Yanlong was released, where Cecily should have been released, which would have been a very good choice then, because of Yanlong's crows, which are not weak to the same weapons as he is. But Cecily can damage Yanlong and the crows, so it would have been an easier time. But even now, I really like to use her in the Fortune's game board, where she can take on enemies which I don't always have the weaknesses for on that row, but she has those. But she's not that strong and doesn't have more capabilities, so a really good solid for Cecily. Triangle Strategy collab was the last new collab EN had, and that one was a banger. 2 of those units were buffed so hard. They both are unbelievably strong now, but first let's talk about the free unit, Serenoa. I love that tank so much. He's able to combust. He can strengthen the attack of the group. He can grant himself double cast and has an extremely powerful nuke which gets repeated with that. He counters attack with his sword. He can hit a 5th time after attacking 4 times regular. He cures his own ailments and recovers health. He slows down the opponents by 30%. He gives the front row 1 BP at the end of the turn to let everyone use 3 BP in the second break turn again with his ultimate, and in comparison to Elvis, you can get him to A4 at day 1 and get one of the most powerful accessories in the game, where you redirect attacks to the wearer of the accessory for 3 turns and give that unit 15% physical defense. I use him even if no sword weakness is present. That's how good he is. And the best of all, he's free. The others are not, but they are even more worth it. Frederica is a fire mage who profits from the combust ailment, so if you have Serenoa on your team or Fiore EX in the front tanking, you only need to have Frederica in the back and get 15% elemental damage up and 15% elemental attack up for the front row, just like that. She can also combust herself by just breaking shields regardless of the weakness or by exploiting the fire weakness, and there she can reduce fire resistance and also debuff elemental defense. And while combust is active, her eruption skill does up to 800 potency single target. But that's not all. She can also call forth the sun and let that rain over the enemies, make it explode and deal AoE damage with 1200 potency. You are guaranteed to hit the damage cap. It's insane. But as I said in the beginning, she's good for every elemental fight, not only for the fire teams. Interestingly, we get units in a short amount of time which also give you elemental attack up too, so with those, that makes Frederica more niche than I thought at first, and fire weakness isn't on that much enemies as I thought it was. Same with wind, but having those units makes it way easier as soon as something comes around with those weaknesses, if you have something that strong with you. So she's like the overpowered niche character here. I did tell you about merchants outclassing Ludai. Krauser was the first one. Roland is the second. He reduces spare resistance down very easily all by himself by 65%. He can cap physical defense down to 30% all by himself. He gains a double cast when he gets to the front row and increases the damage while doing so. He is so powerful. Krauser and Roland are a very good team. They really are. I managed to defeat enemies weak to spare with ease now, which I didn't thought were possible at first. The third merchant in this round is missing still. I don't have him yet. Leon. He's also hitting staff weakness and can do lots of other cool merchant stuff. That triangle makes up for a very good strategy. Talking about Sacred Blaze characters like Leon, Zenia is the first unit I wanted to have her A4 from immediately. It reduces elemental defense by 15% while also poisoning the enemy. So you cap the 30% with Varkin's A4 on break, and the poison activates Zenia's passive to grant her and her row partner 30% elemental attack up and also 30% dark damage up. She can poison the enemy in the first 3 turns with her second passive and can inflict poison surely with one of her skills, which is also reducing elemental defense. She also has a priority skill which reduces even more elemental defense, and her ultimate is also hitting priority and reduces elemental defense again. So Zenia is the dark powerhouse you wanted beside Primrose and Jilmeila instead. Apart from that, she's not seeing as much use sadly. So she's the second strongest niche character. So she's one of the strongest niche characters together with Frederica and Sophia EX for the specific elements. On my way to Rinyuu, I was missing Rondo, so let's talk about Rinyuu now. She can do 2 things which are really worth pulling for. The first one is Gracious Prayer, where she grants the full team, so both rows, regen and gives them 15% elemental and physical defense. She continues using that skill as long as she doesn't use another skill or is switched forcefully to the front or back row. The next one is her Crusader's Prayer, where she gives immunity to silence and terror and also grants the full team 15% physical and elemental attack up and 15% damage up. While doing those moves, she also reduces the SP consumption of your attacks, and especially on those units who are in her row. She can also revive and evade elemental attacks with her ultimate and a few other things, but the 2 first skills are the main reason you want Rinyuu, and those 2 skills are so worth it. Sarisa is the unit I was hoping for so long, a unit which you can use behind your tank and still defend against the enemy's attacks. She can do exactly that. As soon as she acted, she returns to the back and your tank is still tanking. But what can she do? She can shave shields up to 5 single target. She can also reduce physical and elemental attack and can also reduce sword resistance down, dagger resistance down and fire resistance down in one go. So with Richard you can now cap sword resistance down, and she can also be brought to your fire teams behind your tank and shave the last shields of your opponent before having the optimal break. She's just awesome and I always love using her. And here's the reason I had to consider downgrading Rinyuu by 1 star. Primrose EX can put up a regen on your whole team too, which is also increasing the speed and giving 20% to ultimate gauge. And now, while that move is casted, she can do even more in between. She can debuff physical and elemental attack, defense, and she sure can cure your team and buff physical and elemental defense, and is also increasing physical and elemental attack while curing your ailments on your group. So she can do everything? Yeah, she can also use her ultimate to increase physical and elemental attack again while granting 50% ultimate gauge, and every time she uses 3 BP she recovers 1 BP. Since I have Primrose EX, I just don't use Lynette again. But that has one more reason though, which is coming shortly. It's Christmas time, that was a fast year, and Millard EX got buffed so immense with Global's release too. Square likes to buff characters it seems. He can call forth a shield which guards your front from attacks, and those attacks depletes barrier HP, which is kind of extra HP. When the barrier HP is drained, the further damage is reduced from the normal HP again. But while your allies have a barrier, he can increase the damage done by them while raising the physical and elemental attack. He can also grant one unit a damage down by up to 50% for the upcoming attack, a barrier, and even more defense. So with Millard, you don't run into problems surviving lethal attacks. I was very tempted to see his buffed moves, but I just don't use him that often right now. They are way too powerful units right now, and you run into the problem of having not enough space for your units when they don't have capabilities which exceed others. And Millard gets exceeded a lot, which is sad. I really want to use him more often, but maybe his time will come too. For example, she is one of those units I talked about. Tatloch's attack are not that great, but every time she causes damage with one of her skills, she gains one counter. For every counter, the whole group profits from those. For the first 3, the group gets elemental and physical defense up by 15%. At 6, the same with attack up. And at 9, you gain a little SP and HP recovery. Her ultimate gets you 3 of those counters, so it really is fast to have those 6 counters and switch her to the back to have more defense and offense for the rest of the battle without her coming to the front ever again. For fights where you need to build up your defense real quick and have to have that over the course of the battle, she's just the perfect fit. You can also pull for Titus, August and Herminia on that banner by chance, as she's also a villain. If she had an even more impressive kit, that would make her top notch, but she's still very powerful for longer fights. Next up is the Bargello. His skill set is just amazing. So much variety, with only one character is immense, and boosting your damage cap and physical and elemental attack while a broken enemy is present is not even the best he can offer. He can even raise the damage cap by additional 30k for 50k maximum. From 50k maximum damage cap up, while also boosting wind and dagger damage up. Wind! Yeah, he can dagger rest down to cap the existing one by Sarisa and exploits wind weakness while hitting with his dagger, and that very hard. He can also take 100 SP from everyone to attack 2 times with an attack which hits almost as hard as Krauser does with full setup. And his ultimate is recovering everyone's use of their ultimates too. So if you missed a few MTs on your travel through Ostera, Bargello should be the next one on your list. Additionally, what I really like about Bargello is that every unit who is also wind element profits from his buff and passives. So units like Odette will finally see play again, as she was always ramming cap due to her high stats. Now you can equip a damage cap extending weapon onto her, let Bargello boost her damage, and she can now contribute to way more damage than she did before his release. That way a lot of units who were put in the power crap zone like Gertrude can also participate in the battle for huge amount of damage again with their nukes. And depending on which characters you have in your team, like you have Richard and Bargello, or you have Tatloch and Frederica, you don't really need Lynette switching around to give a bit more of elemental or physical attack, because it is at 30% all the time. So if you want to increase the damage output on your units, you can also use Primrose EX for doing that. The 9th arena champion came very late to EN, which made her a relatively easy champion in comparison to Yunnie and Largo, but Hammy's refights to get her awakening stones are tough. But if you manage to beat those, you get her a 4 accessory, which is also one hell of an equip. If equipped to the back row, the front row partner gets 15% physical and elemental defense, while this accessory boosts really much of the equipped unit's attack and speed stat. The best accessory, especially for Hammy herself, as she can make any unit a tank. She provokes the enemy to attack her row partner and switches to the back row with 2 skills, elemental or physical evade, up to 4 times at max boost. While that unit gets attacked, Hammy's passive is healing, 15% of damage taken to the self-made tank when the evades are over with every attack. And as I mentioned with Hayes, she can also set a trap on any character, and when that unit gets attacked, that unit counters the attack, even if evading completely, with 2 tome attacks, AoE, and also decreasing the physical defense. That way you can stack those defense downs until you cast another stronger decrease to cap that existing one. And besides, Hammy is a very powerful tome attacker, so as soon as that becomes a thing in COTC, you sure have the strongest tome user right with you. Next to Yanlong, she's the most useful unit of the arena champions and gets her special place in the outstanding list. The last 2 characters on this list have become my most favorite units now, as these 2, together with Primrose EX, are able to make every one of your multi-hit attackers an overpowered beast. I have never thought of me enjoying the power creep so much, but this is very satisfying. The first one of those 2 newly added to Yen is the global buffed Nephti. She's a very decent shield breaker for axe, staff and tome simultaneously, up to 6 times AoE and 7 times single target, and can even triple cast her nuke, which hits those weaknesses too. On top of that, she can use her ultimate 10 times, which is always granting attack up and crit up, which is stacking on Primrose's or Lynette's ult. And as long as you keep that ult running, the buff will last very long. She can also raise the damage done to your front or heal them and make them immune to ailments, grants a barrier, and her global buff made her also activate critical hits when using elemental attacks. She is so damn OP, it is not even funny. But together with Solon, who we also got at the same time, the amount of damage gets ridiculous. His skills are not really promising at all. There are only 3 skills really worth taking them into account. The first one works like Blue Dice, where random enemies are hit with fire at the start of the turn, but 3 times. So if you put even more accessories onto him, it will increase the potency of that decrease, and you also have more turns of those big numbers. His second skill raises elemental attack, fire damage up and spare damage up. The last 2 can be casted by Roland and Frederica too, but only twice, and only on 1 unit. So thanks, Solon. And the last most OP skill is his ultimate, where he grants 1 unit 100% potency up and increases the damage cap of that unit by 50k. He does this only for 1 turn and it is not extendable, but with Primrose EX and another feature in the game called Keepers, you can use the ultimate twice per break to have the most insane numbers on your enemy. Even if his skill set is not as interesting otherwise, the ultimate alone is so putting him into the OP category. And, interestingly, the power crept section does not have as much units in this part of the series. It seems like every unit seems to bring something unique, which makes them all niche or at least solid enough for taking them into the battle. Or my playstyle just changed and I give more units the chance to shine. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that there are a lot of units coming, and when that happens, you can count on me doing part 3 of my 5-star tier list. I hope you enjoyed that one. If you do, I'd really appreciate a subscription if you didn't already, and give thumbs up to this video if you like what you've seen. See you next time, you're free to play on.